Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Page Turners Plus. As always, we thank you for joining us on this literary journey throughout the Caribbean. Today, we'll be reflecting on David Dabydeen's latest novel, Sweet Li Jie. To tell you a bit more about this novel and our author, we have Paula.
Thank you, Roger. David Dabydeen is a Guyanese poet, novelist, and academic. His latest novel, Sweet Li Jie, was published in December 2024. This is a novel with a lot of moving parts. Set in China and Guyana, it begins in China's Wuhan province in 1875. Throughout the course of the novel, the scene shifts between China and Guyana and between several characters, all of them a little odd, misfits even, most of them having only threadbare connections to each other. The novel also shifts between dreamscape and tangible earthly reality, sometimes without notice to the reader. I would argue that the surrealist foundation of the novel was intentionally designed to keep the reader off balance. David Dabydeen's approach to structure is brilliant in its subtlety. The reader is lulled into the expectation of linear storytelling, only for that expectation to be disrupted by wild occurrences. When I closed the novel, I was left with the sense that this is a work that is surreptitious, not only in respect of its plot, but also in its political messaging.
Thank you, Paula. And I actually want to begin right where you left off. Is Sweet Li Jie a political novel? I say yes. Um, I think David Dabydeen was trying to get at several political points in this novel. He was showing us the feudal system that existed in China in the late late 19th century, and he was also showing us the political and social landscape of British Guyana at the time, as it was called, in the late 19th century, and how with the start of indentureship you had this sort of milieu of races and cultures ended up in the same place, often with friction. Although, of course, one of the main characters in this novel, Jia Yun, represents, in my opinion, a sort of unifier. But he shows us the friction that existed, how colonization fractured the society, and how the colonizers used race to fracture the society for their advantage. So I definitely think it's a political novel.
I'm less sure. Um, or if it is political, I'm wondering in which ways. Because I agree with you that it's a really interesting demonstration or picture or depiction of the end of indentureship, or the end, sorry, not the end of the start of indentureship and the end of enslavement in Ghana in that period. But it also, I thought, was quite apolitical in some ways. Like the communities kind of live. Is it 1846? Is it 1896? Like I know that he gives years at points, but it feels like a kind of just a general after enslavement moment, right? It doesn't feel specific. It doesn't feel like you're locking down particular moments historically that are happening in Guyana at the time. It feels very far away in some ways from some parts of political life, I guess. And there's no sense of the characters themselves having a sense of their own place in for lack of a better word in history. So I definitely think and I'm not sure how critical he is about the ways that like racial divisions are exploited by the British either. I think he mentions it, but I'm not sure he's doing much more than mention it in passing. I mean, this is my view. I don't know what other people think. Francine?
I think all of that is quite deliberate. I think this novel is deliberately subtle. It gives you the outlines of the society, and it leaves you to make your own conclusions. Um, One of the things that I found remarkable was that David Dabydeen described horrendous situations in a very blasé matter. He talks about the tradition of killing girl children as if it's the most natural thing, normal thing to do. And I think he delivers all the horrors of, particularly in China. I don't remember seeing that many horrors in Guyana, but all the horrors of Chinese feudal society. It as if this is just par for the course. And I think I'm almost sure that that was intentional.
Yeah, I agree there in terms that it was brilliant in its subtlety because he mentions that before Jia Yun arrives, there have been voyages from China to Guyana before. And we also know that this is taking place between 1875 and 1876. The book starts in 1875. So it is, what, 40 years after emancipation, and just under 40 years after the end of uh, yeah, so it is 40 years after the end of emancipation. So we do get an idea of the time period. So I think he's not giving us direct telling of what should be the politics, but he's giving us enough nuggets to know that these are certain things that are happening in the society at the time. So that's why I say I think it's a political novel.
Fair enough, fair enough. Paul, I want to pick up on this thing about the girl children. I was really confused by this, but this is perhaps my lack of Chinese history, right? Because for me, killing of girl children is a direct consequence of the one child policy, right? There's a preference for boys, and so girls get killed. But is there a longer trajectory or history there that this novel is pointing to?
I don't know Chinese history myself, but I thought so. I think that's exact. And that wasn't the only demonstration he gave us of the status of women in China. After Wang Changling's father dies, his mother essentially starves herself to death because you're not supposed to outlive your husband by much. And yeah, I'm surprised that you don't find this a political novel. I thought it was intensely political.
I agree with Rolji and Paula. Especially the Ghana part, I felt that yeah, he very subtly let us know like what the political, I guess, situation, political, social, racial, select situation was like at that period in time, just through the conversations that they were having with each other. I found he was pointing out a lot of that.
So we spoke about the politics of the novel. I'm wondering whether you thought that love was an important concept or concern in this novel.
I want to hear from you, Roger, because the reason I put that question in the in the in the list was you said in your Goodreads review that you thought this that love was an important concern in the novel. I didn't think so, so I wanted to hear from you.
I think so. I mean, there was unrequited love because Li Jie, Sweet Li Jie, was just sort of uninterested in in any of Jia Yun's advances, if you could call them that. But I think Jia Yun himself had so much love, not just for Sweet Li Jie, but for China as well. And even though he ended up in Guyana and could have been a successful businessman there, making a fortune, he always had Li Jie on his mind. He had China on his mind, and not to reveal too much, but he went back in search of that love. So I think in that aspect, love was an important concern. Um, but it could be secondary to a lot of the other messages that Dabydeen wanted us to get from this novel. Um, he named the novel Sweet Li Jie. And so throughout the novel, I was thinking this has to be some connection of his love, of Jia Yun's love for Li Jie. So I think in that aspect, in terms of like maternal love, other forms of love, I didn't see much of that. But just that sort of um, love between, well, love that Jia Yun had for Li Jie, that I thought of.
I
I don't
thought
know. Was it love though? It felt more like an obsession than love to me. In fact, I think all
But
of the
isn't
all of
real
those
love
type
an obsession?
no, all of all of those kind of relationships, like with him loving Sweet Li Ji and I've forgotten everybody's name, one Changling, and his obsession with his love for this his fictional character, that was also more of an
Ying
obsession
Ying.
than love with for Ying Ying. Yeah, for me it seemed more like an obsession than love. I mean, he didn't even really know her, right? So Yeah.
And she was 15, but I guess in
But
that
that, I
era, that
mean,
was
in that
normal. Yeah,
era,
that was normal.
that's one of the things too about this novel is that you had to put aside a lot of your 20th, 21st century vision and be like, okay, it's 1876. Okay, this is normal for them. Just, yeah, but no, I wouldn't say love. To me, it was more of an obsession. I mean, I'm like, why, she rejected you. Why are you constantly writing letters to her? Like, literally stalking and through this.
Because she was a woman and she wouldn't have had any choice about who she
Right.
married.
Exactly.
And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the subtle messages of the novel.
Hmm.
I think more than love, this novel was concerned with isolation and lack of love.
Hmm.
Uh, it seemed to me that a lot of the characters were either isolated or like had hostile, were in the middle of hostile social situations. Um, the Harris chose isolation, but I think Yang Wang Changling, he was always yearning for his mother.
Hmm.
I think everybody was lonely or isolated.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
I also think friendship was actually a more central concern than love in lots of ways. When we see the relationship between Harris and Gurr and the main character, like there's such a beautiful portrait of care. I thought that was really, and the way that those friendships develop the character, right? The narrative arc is completely shaped by the friendships that he has, but also the people that he refuses to befriend, right? He doesn't come under the influence of the dishonest reverend or the dodgy hotelier, right? He chooses his friends carefully, and he reaps rich rewards for it. So I think if there's a love that can be said to be central, I think the love is friendship, right? It's care,
And
but
then
we see that also with you're gonna say Swallowtail and yeah, and we see
Bayou.
context as well, right? But also with Bayou and Wang Changling, right? There's a real care for them, and also Bayou and Swallowtail. Sorry, Bayou and the daughter, whose name I can't remember, who's the main character.
Sweet Li Jie.
There you
Well,
go.
yeah, right. Not the main character. I mean, she definitely was not the main character. She was I don't know what to call her
Peripheral.
the
Love
actually.
interest.
catalyst, maybe the
The cat,
catalyst.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
she
Mhm.
was, yeah.
I don't think this book would pass the Bechdel test. She's very much the object of his affections, but has no voice of her own most of the time. I don't think we ever see her own interest, agency, and I think the same can be said for Swallowtail to a certain extent. Like these women that are, oh, and obviously the fictional character of Yin Yang, which I think is really interesting. Like, they're these objects in the eyes of these men who
Hmm.
order their lives around their love for these women, but that love is totally unrequited or unwarranted or unwarranted. And like you say, Francine, they don't even know these women; they're completely undeveloped. Like it's really quite strange in some ways. I'm not sure why the author made that choice. I'd be curious to ask him. We might get the chance.
Swallowtail, you thought she was undeveloped. We spent a lot of time with Swallowtail. We saw her from her earliest childhood.
Hmm.
Um, there was a whole segment of the book devoted to Swallowtail. I cannot imagine how you could think Swallowtail was underdeveloped.
I think as a love interest, she was underdeveloped. Like we understood her as a friendship, and we understand her as a person.
She wasn't meant, that was certainly not her main role in the novel. I think that was incidental. Bao Yu's love for her. I think their friendship was more important than any kind of romantic um, interest.
I agree, but did Bayou see it that way, or are we led to believe he saw it that way? Because my understanding was that he thought of her as a love interest.
Yes, and she even thought of herself as a love interest, but it couldn't happen because Bao Yu was too ugly, right? And that no, what that was what the novel was telling us. Bao Yu was too ugly. He was deformed. So she could not imagine him as a love interest, even though she had this deep, deep love for him. I think this novel is very interested in how brutally we treat each other. And so that Even though she loves him, Swallowtail loves him, she discards any idea of him being a love interest because he's ugly, you know?
I agree there, Paula, and actually want to focus on that sort of friendship between Bayo and Swallowtail because parts of it seemed imaginary or imagined, and parts of it seemed real. So, how did the shifts from dreamscape and physical reality affect how you received the story? For me, I was lost for for a few pages. I was wondering whether this is actually happening, and then suddenly he'd mentioned, in paraphrasing here, that Bayou was in a deep dream or something, and I realized all of that came before was just Bayou dreaming of his relationship with the Swallowtail. So it didn't affect how I received the story in the end, but as I read the book, there were moments of, I don't want to call it confusion, but wonder for me.
But I think that was intentional. He did the same thing with Swallowtail. So Swallowtail has these dreams, right? This dream. And then the dream people appear in real life. And at first I was like, what just happened? And then of course we see, I don't want to speak about it too explicitly, but then Swallowtail also transforms and we see her elsewhere. And that that really had me a little confused. But then I realized that that is what the author wanted to do. I don't know why he wanted to destabilize us like that. When we speak to him, I guess we can ask him.
And then, well, I don't want to reveal too much of, but I thought that Swallowtail got a downgrade when we saw her in another place. But as you said, we could always ask the author. But to take it back to Jia Yun, a lot of the story was narrated by him, and I know Kesua mentioned previously that we only get in his side. So how well did you get to know him as a character?
I didn't know Jai Young at all. I felt, even though he's narrating this story, I just did not know this person. Um, we did not have, who are his parents? How was he raised? You know, we see him, we meet him when he's working with, I can't remember his boss's name. And this character is so tepid and so just not particularly interesting in any way. That, well, I found him not particularly interesting in any way. Um, that I just didn't know this man. I felt I knew Bao Yu very well. I think we got to know him very well. Even Swallowtail, we got to know a lot better. And this man is narrating a lot of this story. So I found that interesting, an interesting narrative technique that the person who is narrating most of the story, we basically don't know. I suspect it's intentional.
I'm not sure I agree though that we didn't know him. I mean, we may not have known his roots, but I think we got to know his character in that period of time based on his actions and his reflections. I mean, like Kesoa said, the way that he chose who his friends would be, like we could tell the kind of person he is by the fact that he rejected the hotelier and the pastor guy or reverend or whatever he was. I think the way that he treated his customers in Ghana and the way he treated both Harris and Gurr, I feel like we learned a lot about his character. Maybe we didn't learn a lot about his childhood or how he grew up, but I think we learned a lot about him as a person and how he felt about people and how he was moving through the world. That was kind of my take.
But he wasn't very complex, was he? He was just a good guy. I mean, what did you find him interesting? He was so bland.
He was very bland, but also he was also very repressed, I think, right? More than bland, even, because he's got a strong sense of self and also a strong sense of integrity. That's the two things that you really learn about him, right? Is he respects people, he's very loyal to good people. He's also very averse to bad people. Like he does make kind of he does make clear choices, and he does and he has a strong sense of what's important, what's right, and what's wrong, and that kind of is the big driver of who he is throughout the novel. Um, but I'd agree with you, the complexity doesn't go much further than that. Why has he come to Guyana is never really clear. And why doesn't he want to settle down in a way that we would anticipate, or the way that his means would suggest he could? Or, you know what I mean? Like, there's lots of unanswered questions in terms of his motivations.
No, I don't agree with you that it's not clear why he came to Guyana. He came to Guyana, he was following his employer. His employer wanted to escape all of the political instability in China. Um,
But why does he stay long after he doesn't have to? Like, do you know what I mean? There's lots of, I don't know. I felt like there was like, these are kind of not surface level, but a little bit surfacey, right? They're not. There's not a lot of depth to him as a character. I think, like, beyond this kind of strong moral compass, if you like, is how I've read it.
Yeah, because even when he gets to Guyana, the interest in the story at that point didn't come from him. It came from the people he interacted with. It came from Dufu, it came from Harris, it came from Gura. So he is just a very plain character narrating a story, and maybe that was deliberate. We're not meant to get anything really off of him, but we're supposed to get information off of the people he surrounds himself with or he interacts with. But I think this is a good point for us to take a break where we'll have a reading from the author from this novel. And when we come back, we'll pick up the discussion. Stay tuned.
My name is David Dabydeen. I'm from Guyana, and I live in Britain, and increasingly now in Guyana. And I'm reading from a novel called Sweet Li Jie, which is set in China in the 19th century. And I'll read the first 2 pages, which introduces the Chinese characters. And this is a girl called Sweet Li Jie who falls from a bicycle. My bicycle, Sweet Li Jie cried, in a second before toppling to the ground and hitting her head. Wind whipped up dew, roadside plants sneezed, were uprooted in the sudden storm. The second stretched out. She saw her plums tossed in the air and scattering. Dozens of plums, the day's sucker, 2 yuans. 2 yuans for noodles, salt, pepper, even a piece of bone with some meat clinging to it. If Butcher Chen, if Butcher Shen was drunk and his knife, perfected in the battlefield, failed to scrape off every thread. Butcher Shen, normally she would tremble when thinking of him, but not in the second which seemed to stretch into a season as she fell. Neither Butcher Shen nor the loss of fruit and the day's livelihood affected her. My bicycle, she cried, before falling into unconsciousness. It had been nearly a year since the bicycle had become hers, a gift from suitor Jian Yun, whom she had spurned. The sweet was her mother's doing, to entice her out of the despair which was Sweet Li Jie's sickness. The girl's head crawls with lice. They have put goo into her mind. Can you rid her of the poison? Ma Hongnian pleaded. The village doctor Du Fu promised he would, in return for 25 yuans paid over 5 months. It will take months to purge her thoughts and bring her back to laughter, Du Fu said, holding out a ball of herbs mixed in the gallbladder of a dog. It is not just lice, but demons. Ordinary medicine can't purge her on its own. She has to dream away demons. I will give you this special herb. Boil it in salt water and give it to her at night, not to drink, but to breathe in the vapors. And when the sun comes up, give her a different herb to make her daydream. Will you make her a child again, a sweet child? Will you take 2 yuans and some plums? Ma Hongnian asked in a mournful voice. She knew Du Fu was a quack who demanded too much of the villagers. All poor, except rich beyond dreams Wang Changling, who was richer by far than Quack Du Fu. He owned the land which they tilled for a sickly living, blood rents drawn from them week after month after year. I will cure her, Quack Du Fu lied.
Welcome back. Thank you for sticking with us. So, as always, after the reading, I like to start with a bit of controversy. Are the women in this novel largely asexual?
Well, certainly not Pioneer. Pioneer is hypersexual.
I would say I would say the majority of the women are, but Pioneer definitely takes the cake and dominates a significant portion of the novel with her sexuality. Um, I'm wondering whether that was also a deliberate choice because even with Sweet Li Jie, although Jiayun hasn't yet made success with his advances to her, we don't get any sense of her interest. I mean, she's 15, but as Francie mentioned, this is the 19th century. We see no interest. She has no interest in any sort of relationship with anyone. So we only get um, indications of sexuality from Pioneer. So I would say they'll by sorry, go ahead,
No,
Paula.
I'm wondering whether we got any deep insight into anybody's sexual interests other than um, the emperor and the I can't remember his name, the young man who tried to overthrow him. Um, the uh, Wang Changling, he's in love with Ying Ying, but he has no relationship with any woman, any real woman. Um, the our narrator, whose name I for some reason I'm not remembering now, he
Jiayun.
yeah, even though he's obsessed with Sweet Li Jie, we don't see him. He's no great sexual dynamo. He doesn't even look to me like he is particularly interested in Sweet Li Jie beyond, oh, she's just kind of like this fantasy, but it's no great sexual, he has no great sexual interest. Then Harris lives in the bush, ain't no woman around. He girl too ugly, no woman ain't want he. Do we see anything? I mean, is this book really concerned with sexuality? We see the priest, the the evil priest. We see he and Pioneer and other women having some strange sexual alliances, but
I
I
also
don't know if sex is that important in this novel.
I disagree. I think sex is very important in this novel, but it's who's having sex and with whom that's the big question, right? Because we also what Dabydeen does in this novel is align sex quite closely with power, right? So, like you say, we see the Reverend on he's got a whole floor of this hotel to himself, and he's clearly having multiple women, concubine type relationships in a way that we know the church doesn't approve of. We also know that the circus master that Bayou is with has takes a woman in every town, and that seems to be the pattern we see from other people as well. They take a woman from every town when they're traveling. You think in his youth, Wang Chanling might have been the same, right? So there's this sense that there's sex used as a display of power. Actually, is the way that the novel portrays it, which I think is probably quite problematic because all of these are the way that Chinese men have sex, but we still don't see any agency for Chinese women except for Pioneer, who we understand. I don't think she's hypersexual. I think she's frustrated in her marriage and therefore seeks out lovers. I don't think she, but it doesn't seem like she's doing crazy things. She just is an interesting character, and so chooses lovers in an interesting sort of way that I perhaps would not. Yeah, in fact, I definitely would not, right? Because she's doing a mad thing. But I don't. But we don't get the sense that she's completely driven by that. That that's her sole motivation, and that like because of sex, she has no other interest in anything else. Do you know what I mean? Or she's not. She's not dominated by that. She's very careful, and it gets her what she wants. And for that reason, I wouldn't call her hypersexual. I'd call her just having needs that she's found a very interesting way of having met. An interesting immoral slash, right?
But Joshua, most
I
of
think
this,
sex is really important, but I think it's dealt with very curiously by the author in this context.
but most of the examples we see of women being quote unquote sexual are in oppressive circumstances. There's no agency for them. You mentioned the sort of concubine situation with the Reverend, and even the situation with the circus master. So we never really see women taking agency to really express their sexuality. It's always in under what I would call forced circumstances. Is
But
it that
Which gets
isn't
back
that
to
because?
Kesawa's
Okay.
point that it's about power. It's not, it's not about sexuality. It's about the use of sex as power. And one of the things I thought about too when I was considering that question was that a lot of the book is the book is narrated by basically three men if we include Bayu Yu. I've forgotten everybody's name. And I feel like the women that they were writing about, like were they really at this point in time, like were they even considering whether these women had any sort of sexuality or sexual agency? I think not. Like their point of view of the woman had nothing to do with sex, basically.
But I
Sweet Li
think the
Jie was just
oppression of.
an Sweet Li Jie, like you said, was like it's like was a fantasy for him. So and Ying Ying was also just a fantasy for Wan Qing Ling. So they were not real concrete people for both of these two men, and so it makes sense to me that they were not really exposing their sexual side.
But I
Yeah,
think
I
the oppression of women is an important concern of this novel.
Right.
And I think all of the things you're talking about demonstrate the oppression of women. Um, I don't know.
I just, I could agree with that if it wasn't for the character of Pioneer, because as we said, like sex and power are kind of equated here in this novel, but the only woman with any kind of sexual agency does the same thing, right? She also is using sex in a as a tool of domination, right? So then how is it is it suggesting that women she's also oppressing men? She's not having sex with women as far as we're aware in the novel. So I don't know if it is that concerned with the oppression of women. I didn't get that impression. Doesn't it feel like it just feels like Dabydeen is not I don't know. I don't think he's writing women well, but I also think he's painting Chinese culture in flattering light as well. So there's lots of things going on. No, not writing women well. That's not fair. I think he's also his characters are not concerned with the women who they obsess over. That's actually what I'm trying to say. They're not whole people. They're only viewed from this very narrow prison of love interest or object. And they're if they're not half fantasy, then they're whole fantasy, right? They're based on no real interaction with these women. They're no long standing communication. The only one that exception to that is Bayou and Swallowtail, and that doesn't end in a love situation either. And we still never know how she feels about him in the
We don't know who feels about who.
Swallowtail and Bayou.
Swallowtail.
Like
No,
you know,
no. Swallowtail loves Bao Yu. She loves him. And that is very clear in the novel. I don't know. You and I must have read different books.
no, I get that she cares for him, but it feels. I guess probably what I'm trying to say is sorry. Maybe you're right. It's not that she doesn't care about him. It's that is also not what we'd recognize as a happy, loving relationship. That kind of that it's still not a love story that comes to fruition. Perhaps is what I mean.
but it's not meant to be a love story, Kesu. I think it's the focus is more the friendship. I think the focus is more the friendship in this relationship. And although Bayou has these visions of him having a much closer relationship with Swallowtail, those are dreams. He's only dreaming of that, but I think he knows that they can't happen. And that's the reason why he heeded the advice to escape the circus, to put it that way. But back to your point of this novel not being in the you did retract it of it not being in the women world. I think there were two layers to this. There was servility, and then there was oppression of women. I think that's how I saw it. I saw it on two levels because you had the servility of the men, but you also had the servility of the women, and then the oppression of the women as well on another level. So I'm wondering whether other members of the panel saw that the servility in China and Guyana in the 19th century.
Yes. I don't know that I can add anything more to that. Yes, both the servility was just a feature of both societies. I don't think I can add anything.
No, I think you also get an illustration of that with the husband who, due to his circumstances, is forced to sell his wife, right? So that she is the ultimate kind of person who loses in that context. So I think it. I don't disagree. I just think I don't know. Maybe it rubbed me the wrong way.
So, at the beginning of the novel, taking you back to the beginning, the author places three quotations. One from Tang Yu, a court official, which says, I'm quoting here, the British and other foreigners came, there was a sudden collapse. All we built over centuries suddenly collapsed. We are all reduced to coolies, circus performers, concubines, customers, and Christians. Then there was another quote by John Gladstone who said, the Negroes have left, but my lands are now lush with coolies. And the final quote by Jorge Luis Borg says, was there a garden or was the garden a dream? How do these quotations relate to the novel?
I thought they were the template for the novel. I think he wrote the novel around those three ideas.
I agree, especially with the last one. Was there a garden or was the garden a dream? I actually saw two possible interpretations in terms of the Chinese indentured servants thinking that there would be a lush garden for them in Ghana. A lot of them went there to seek prosperity. They were hoodwinked by the British colonizers and they got there and realized it's a whole other game of servility. They were escaping servility to get into servility. So I saw it on that front, but I also saw Bayou's dreaming. He was thinking there was this garden where him and Swallowtail could live happily ever after, but that was never the reality. So I saw it for that. And then, of course, the John Gladstone quote. That's just a situation that happened after slavery. They replaced the Africans with indentured servants from all over the world: the Portuguese, the Indians, and the Chinese. So, as you mentioned, Paul, I think it definitely provided the template for this novel.
And the dream, is it a dream or is it real? Also, is the foundation for the surrealism in the novel. Because this, yeah, it's surrealist. So we often don't know whether what we're reading is a dream or whether it's real.
Yeah, I think that's what Tony thought as well. That quotations were the essence of the novel. That the ravages on the effects of colonialism, low self-esteem, self-hatred, social dissonance were all kind of captured in those quotes.
And another one of Kessua's question: is it uncomfortable to read a primarily negative portrayal of early Sino-Caribbean communities written by an Indo-Caribbean man? I think this will spur some discussion.
I I found that interesting coming from Miss Kessel, who takes the position that the idea of write what you know is somehow a bad thing. And now Miss Kessewa is saying that she's uncomfortable or suggesting that she's uncomfortable with an Indian Caribbean man writing about the Chinese Caribbean experience. So Miss Kessewa, come in, man, tell me.
First off, I must say it's Doctor, not Miss. And
Oh
secondly,
no, no, the miss, my dear, is a Caribbean thing. We call all when we're being facetious, we call women miss, and I am being facetious.
so I made myself laugh. No, okay. So I don't think write what you know is in and of itself terrible. I'm aware of the history of that adage coming from this kind of CIA right infiltration covert operation situation, where they're interested in reducing empathy, right, and solidarity movements, and write what you know is a way of kind of silencing people that don't have access to power, um, quite quite deliberately. So I'm skeptical of it. I also don't think, and I also think, yeah, not writing what you know teaches you to learn things so that you can write about them, is another way of looking at it, right? Um, and breeds empathy and solidarity, which are things I think are good, both in humans and in writers. I think my discomfort came from I think overall, I feel like this is actually quite a negative portrayal of these early Chinese communities, right? This isn't like a place. These are not people I'd want to live among. These are people that are not happy, yeah. And so that then I think is a bit different from just like, are they writing Chinese people when they're not Chinese? Then like you've also got quite a negative portrayal. Like our hero or narrator, who we've already is not a very interesting person, is the only kind of good guy, right? The other good people in the novel are Gur and Harris, neither of which are from that community, right? So we've got this like exceptional good guy, and everybody else is a mixed bag. And I say communities, right? Because it is about the community. So I'm not saying that there aren't individual characters who aren't excellent or good or whatever, but as communities, you've got this kind of village that's like run over by warlords, which is perhaps historical. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But they're also a bit mean and they murder um, when they don't like particular things. And so, and they're not particularly inclusive or friendly. The communities of Chinese people that we meet, none of them are particularly functional, friendly, warm, and happy places. And maybe that's what Chinese communities are like for Chinese people on the inside. But for me, it was a very different portrayal. It was a little bit dehumanizing. Again, not the individual humans, because you do get a sense of them as fully rounded humans, lots of the characters. But as a community, it was a bit of I wasn't sure about it. And so for that to then be written by someone who is not from that community, I was like, this doesn't feel amazing. I'm not sure how I feel about it, and that's why I posed the question: like, does it feel uncomfortable? Like, if a non-black person wrote stuff about black communities that like was just really quite negative, I know I'd feel away. I know I'd feel away. So even if the main character was this exceptional black person, right? I'd be like, I'm not into it, and so oh, for me, it was a tough one.
I don't see how you can write about a feudal society and have a sweetness and light story. So
The
what?
people that
David
live
had
in
it.
society are different from the society that is governing them, right? It's about the way they interact with each other.
But Casper, I'm not sure I could agree with you for several reasons. And I mean, I do acknowledge like your discomfort with it. It's real, but David Dabydeen comes from a very multicultural society, and just as we've seen Astrid Romer writing about people of different ethnicities in Suriname, I expect the same from David Dabydeen. Guyana has indigenous people, Portuguese, Africans, Indians. Um, and I don't see a problem of him writing from that perspective. In terms of him writing what occurred in China, he spent 5 years as Guyana's ambassador to China, and I assume he did a lot of historical research while he was there, and that resulted in this novel. But of course, we'll ask him when we interview him how that shaped the novel. But I didn't have any problem with him writing about this community. If the historical records reflect this feudal society where people were servile, people were violent, the British came in and destroyed everything and killed people willy nilly, that's just the truth. I don't think he editorialized or took creative license to tell us anything more than what was in the historical record. So I didn't have any problems on that front.
I
And
actually had
even
more problems with China than I had the way he wrote about the Chinese arriving in Guyana. Those were the communities I was particularly thinking about, actually.
But even when he writes about the people doing horrible things, because I didn't read it as in these Chinese people are doing these terrible things. I read it as these human beings were doing horrible things. Bao Yu, for example, did terrible things to the peasants when he was under Wang Changling's employment. But then we see Bao Yu's background. And we understand why Bao Yu would become this monster. It's the pecking order. That's how it works. I wouldn't expect any human being who had Bao Yu's background to behave any differently. And Bao Yu, even though he did these terrible things to the peasants, was a man who was capable of intense love. Um, he loved his what's the partner? Why am I forgetting
Swallowtail.
her name? Huh?
Swallowtail.
Swallowtail. Then there was the other woman in the circus, the overweight woman, and he treated her so tenderly. So I had no difficulty with it.
I will confess that I kind of had some of the same reflections that Kesua did because I actually stopped the book to go look up David Dabydeen's origins. I mean, he was Guyanese, but I was like, but yeah, Guyanese, that doesn't mean anything. He can be, it's a multicultural society, like you said. So I did kind of have similar thoughts, but I do also try to trust that authors, like you said, Keso, if you're writing what you don't know, that you would do put in, the required research. And so I have to trust that, he did his due diligence, so to speak. But it will be interesting, I think, if when we meet with him to find out a bit, especially about what drove him to want to write about the Chinese indentured servants in Guyana.
I actually love these natural endings because the next time the viewers see us, we'll actually be talking to David Dabydeen about this novel, Sweet Li Jie. So thank you for joining us and stay tuned. We'll have an interview with David Dabydeen in our next episode. Thank you for joining us.